Hey everyone, and welcome to Slumber Reads. Tonight we have 2 hours of horror stories as per usual. I hope you all enjoy them. If you do, please be sure to drop a like rating. Dropping a like only takes a quick second, but it does help out the channel so very much. Subscribing if you are new is also very much appreciated, as I do post content just like this as often as I can. Roughly every 5 days is what I aim for. But yeah, sit back, do whatever it is that you do to relax, enjoy the 2 hours of horror stories with no mid-roll ads, except for the ad break after this intro. There will not be any more ad breaks after that one. And as always, I hope you all have a great night. Forgive me. It started on a Monday, right on the hottest day of the summer. I keep a pretty strict morning routine. I have since mid-high school. When I realized that, it's true. Surviving off of 4 hours of sleep and 5 Pop-Tarts eaten spread out throughout the course of the day really isn't very good for your mental and physical well-being. I go to bed early with a full nighttime routine complete with noise-canceling headphones, and I wake up well-rested around 6 a.m., which is right when the sun is coming up in mid-July. That's one of the reasons I really prefer the winter. I like to be up before it's bright outside. It gives me a sense of privacy for those few hours before anyone else is awake. It gives me some time where I know without a shadow of a doubt that no one will be thinking about me, looking at me, or trying to talk to me. It did, at least. On this Monday, I was following my usual schedule. I rolled out of bed to the sound of my cats shrieking at me, fed them, hopped in the shower, got dressed, and put on some coffee. I didn't notice him until I walked to the window, mug in hand, warming both of my palms. He was unassuming. He stood right at the end of my driveway, in front of the concrete path through the grass to my front door. He was wearing comfortable clothes, like what you might put on for a trip to the airport. Sweatpants, hoodie. His hair was wet, as if he'd also recently gotten out of the shower, just like I had. I frowned, bringing my coffee to my mouth as I watched him. I didn't recognize him, but that wasn't saying much. I don't know any of my neighbors. I mostly just kept to myself. He didn't have a dog, so he wasn't walking one. He wasn't holding newspapers or mail. In fact, this man lacked any sense of duty at all. There was no urgency or responsibility in his stance. He gave me no indication that he was only pausing in front of my yard to smell the flowers before continuing along with his day. He was just standing. I found my work bag where I'd left it the night before, sitting on my couch. I packed it back up, shoving my laptop and refilled water bottle into the pocket. When I got back to the window, he was still standing there. He was looking around, almost like he was bored. He looked up at the clouds, then down at his feet, and at what must have been a watch on his wrist. I hesitated, taking one last sip of my coffee before putting my cup in the sink. Then I opened my front door, stepping outside into the rapidly warming day. "Hey," I called out, my voice still gravelly from sleep. I crossed my arms over my chest as if it was cold, hugging myself. "Can I help you, man?" The man seemed surprised to hear me speak, looking up from a crack in the pavement that he'd been closely examining. He blinked, the silence stretching between us across the lawn. "No," he said finally. "I'm okay." More silence, this time feeling far more tense. I felt my face grow hot in embarrassment for the both of us. How didn't he understand that it was strange that he was standing there, in front of my house at 7 in the morning, and wouldn't tell me why? "Okay," I mumbled finally, frustrated. I was never good at confrontation. I locked the door behind me, taking extra care to make sure it was latched securely. It had of course crossed my mind that he could be casing me, but who would be so stupid as to do it out in the open like this, where I could clearly see his face and identify him to the police later if I had to? I got in my van and backed out of the driveway. In my rearview mirror, I could see him, standing there, watching me pull out. He didn't move. I told myself this was fine. This was just a weird story to tell Casey later. Another one of those instances where something strange and unexplainable happens to someone that realistically has a perfectly reasonable explanation. I was fine with not knowing why this happened, because he'd been gone by the time I got home, and that would be that. I was early to work, but I was always a little early. I hung out in the break room, waiting to clock in. 10 minutes before my shift started, Casey arrived. He looked more tired than usual, with bags under his eyes, and he groaned when he spotted me, slumping down across from me. "Good morning," he grumbled, drawing out the G. I couldn't help it. A small smile tugged at my lips. Casey expressed everything so animatedly, as opposed to my usual monotone. It left me wondering every day what he was going to be like. He was my only sense of entertainment at work, and maybe in general. There weren't many people that I genuinely considered a friend of mine, but he'd placed himself adamantly in that role almost as soon as I met him a few years ago in this very room. All of the stress of the morning melted away. "You're not going to want to hear this," I said, "but you forgot your name tag." He looked down at himself and threw his head back in agony. "Dang it, Megan will be so upset. 3rd time this week." I checked the time. 5 minutes until I clocked in. "Still getting those calls?" "Yes, my God, they won't give it a break." He scrubbed at his face. His hair looked greasy, like he'd forgotten to wash it. "I've tried blocking the numbers. I've called the phone company. Whoever it is won't stop. They must be buying burner phones or something. I really think it's that guy from last month that I pissed off." "All you said was no refund for that destroyed phone. That thing was like a couple of slivers of glass tied together by some wires." "I know." He rested his head on his arms, slumping over on the table. "Well, apparently he found another place to buy it off him, because he could sure afford a new one." It was time for me to start work. As I stood up, everything that I wanted to tell him about rushed back to me. Something about how unexplained the calls he'd been getting were had reminded me. "Oh my God, I have to tell you something later. When's your lunch break?" Casey could always make things feel a little less serious. He could always make me feel better, make me see that things weren't so drastic. I hoped he never lost that quality about him. When work was over, the sun was low over the horizon, drenching the parking lot in orange. My day had felt long and stressful, as most did, but I still relished the sense of purpose and community that it afforded me. As much as I liked being home and by myself, being at my job was crucial to my stability, and I always had a hard time transferring from one state to another, because when I left in the evening, and the drive home felt eerie and quiet compared to the bright fluorescent lights and conversation I'd been submerged in moments before. I listened to the radio, letting the sound of newscasters and commercials comfort me as I took my route home. As soon as I turned down my street, I knew something was wrong. I knew before I even saw them. There were 6 people now, all standing in front of my house. The man from this morning was still there, leaning from left to right to give each foot a break from the burden of his weight, right where I'd left him. But now there were more of them, lined up behind him in single file, all unassuming and dressed comfortably, as if they had nowhere else to be but here. I pulled into my driveway, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. I waited a moment before turning off the engine, the radio droning in the background, not absorbing anything, and garbled voices were saying, "Was I supposed to call the police?" That sounded like my personal nightmare. Was this some sort of group effort to freak me out? Some kind of gang stalking tactic? I couldn't think of a single person who might hate me enough to do something like this. I tended to stay out of people's way. I got out of the car, shrugging my bag over my shoulder, muffling over what I should say. "Excuse me," I called out, taking a few steps towards the line, cautious. What's going on here? Maybe it wasn't the most eloquent way to ask, but I could hardly even get the words out. My voice was shaking just as much as my hands still were. A couple of the people looked at each other, I swore I saw one of them shrug. A younger man, maybe a few years younger than me. "We're waiting," the younger man said finally, smiling politely. It was like the smile I gave customers after an extra grueling rush. Tired. I stared at him blankly. I looked between each of their faces. That look was the only thing they had in common. That exhaustion, sewn in a little below the surface, somehow mingling with a certain sense of excitement that hummed in the air between them. Anticipation. "Why?" I deadpanned. I was getting frustrated again. What did I have to do to get a straight answer? For what? Why here? The young man looked around as if hoping that someone else might answer, but when no one spoke up, he turned to me again. "This is where we were told to wait." My mouth dropped open, and I forced it to close again. I was in awe at how he thought that was a suitable answer. I opened my mouth another time to say something concise. Something like, "Who the hell told you to wait here?" But all that came out was a strangled sound, like I was an animal that had been shot by a bow and arrow. I went inside, shutting down and defaulting into walking up my front steps, locking the door again behind me. I tossed my bag down and pulled out my phone, calling Casey. I didn't know what else to do. My cats meowed at my feet, scratching at my ankles. "Stop calling this number," he said after a couple of rings, his voice slightly breathless. "I'm serious, dude. If you don't stop, I'll..." "It's me," I said, slumping down into a chair at my kitchen table. I looked around just to make sure nothing seemed tampered with, although my door had still been locked when I got home. Sorry, man. I'm on a run. I just assumed it was that guy again. What's up?" I paused to swallow, collecting my words and lining them up in my head like those people outside, one after another. "You know that man I told you about who was standing outside my house this morning?" "Yeah?" I let out a shaky breath. "He's still here, and there are more of them now." I heard him stop running, his breathing hard and his clothes rustling as he readjusted them. "Are you serious?" "Yeah." For some reason I felt on the verge of tears. I didn't want to be a baby. I just didn't like situations like this. Situations where I felt like I needed help. But my anxiety was bad enough as it was. I just wanted someone else to see the same thing I was, affirm that my fear was justified. "Hang on," he panted. "I'm only a few blocks away from you. I'll come over." "Okay," I muttered, resisting the urge to tell him to be careful. That was stupid. The people outside hadn't shown any signs of being dangerous. "Thanks." I watched out of my front window waiting for him to arrive. I watched the people on the line. Some had sat down on the curb, some were checking their phones. The first man and an old woman behind him were having an animated conversation. Before my very eyes, 2 more people joined, walking up from somewhere down the street. Casey stared at them as he jogged up my driveway, his eyebrows furrowed in confusion. They stared right back at him, some whispering amongst themselves. I unlocked the door for him, letting him inside. He was drenched in sweat, his hair even greasier than it had been that morning. "You weren't kidding," was the first thing he said, peering through the blinds like I had just been doing. "No," I choked out, beginning to pace. "Why would I joke about this?" "I don't know." He ran his fingers through his hair. "To freak me out?" When have I ever done something like that? Despite everything, despite the way my face was screwed up as if I was in physical pain, he grinned at me. "Thought maybe you were trying something new." "Casey." "Okay, I'm sorry." He nodded, looking up at the ceiling like he was mulling it over. "Let's call the police." The patrol car that pulled up carried a heavy-set bald man with a blonde mustache. A man who looked unequivocally like a cop. He came to the door while looking behind his shoulder, just like Casey had. I told him about the man. I told him I had tried to talk to them. To not much success. I told him I was worried for my own safety, just like Casey had instructed me to before his arrival. "It's just like at the doctor," he said. "Exaggerate so they have to take it seriously." The cop agreed that it was strange. "Give me a moment," he told me. "I'll try and get some answers." Casey and I watched as he went up to the line. Starting with the man at the front, I could see their mouths moving, but there was no way to know what they were saying from there. The man nodded at something, and the cop shrugged. Everything seemed very ordinary, as if none of this was anything of any urgency. Casey and I shared a nervous look. "Here's the thing," the cop said when he finally returned to my front door, after seeming to speak to a few more of them. "They don't seem very talkative. Best I can assume is this is some kind of social experiment type deal, or a prank. But they don't seem to be aggressive or of ill intention." I could do nothing but stare at him. Casey was the one to speak after a moment of empty air. "Can't you tell them to go away?" The cop sighed, taking a moment to speak in a low voice into his radio. "They're on public property." "They're in front of my house," I managed to squeak. "They're inches from my lawn." The man nodded sympathetically, in a way that didn't feel entirely sincere. "I understand that. Unfortunately, I can't do much unless they pose an active threat." I could tell he was already detaching himself from the situation, losing interest in our conversation. "Call us again if they do anything else." I watched him go, offering me one last curt nod. I couldn't believe it. When I turned, Casey was shaking his head in dismay, looking just as exasperated as I was feeling. He stayed for a while, then told me he would have to go home. It was dark by then, the streetlights illuminating the standing bodies lying down the sidewalk. They weren't even leaving for the night. "I'm sorry," he winced. "I have to feed my dog and try to get some rest. I'll call you first thing in the morning and check in, okay?" I just nodded. My throat felt tight. It was taking everything in me not to beg him to stay. I didn't want to be alone, but even more than that, I didn't want to seem desperate. He searched my face, apprehensive. I could tell he felt guilty. "Will you tell me if anything changes?" I nodded again, summoning my strength. "Don't worry, Casey. I'm good. Are you sure you're okay walking home? I could give you a ride." I said it thinking of the people outside, as if one of them might chase him down, but as soon as it left my mouth, I remembered his weird phone calls. It occurred to me that he might be scared right now, too. Still, he shook his head. "I'll be fine. I'm fast. I'll run." He punctuated the sentence with a laugh. "Cool. Okay. I'll see you tomorrow." "Cool." He hovered awkwardly by the door for a moment before giving me a handshake, slapping my hand. I was sure I was sweaty, but he didn't show any acknowledgement, which I immensely appreciated. As soon as he was gone, the house settled into an uncanny quiet. I turned on all the lamps, closed all my shades, and double-checked that all the doors were locked. Then I went to bed, praying that when I woke up, things would go back to normal. But they weren't. The second I opened my eyes the next day, a deep feeling of dread closed in on me. There had to be more than 70 people now, lined up down the street. I walked down my driveway, staring in horror. Some of them had brought chairs. Some were sleeping, curled up against the rain gutters. Some seemed wide awake, bouncing anxiously on the balls of their feet. I couldn't even see all the way to the end of the line, as it curved where the street did, disappearing around a bend. I felt like my brain was breaking. I sucked up all my nerves and walked down the line, trying to determine if I recognized a single one of them. Some were more willing to talk to me than others. Some of them just looked at me nervously, or avoided my eyes entirely. I started asking each of them what they were waiting for, to varying degrees of success, but no one would give me a completely straight answer. "I'm here for my son. I need another chance," one woman told me, but when I asked what she meant, she only shook her head at me apologetically. They all think that being first in line means they'll be first, another woman said, as if she was just gossiping, as if I had any idea what she was talking about. But I don't even think that's how it works. Still, it's good to be here early. Probably. Shows you really want it. One man, when I focused in on him, burst into tears. The people next to him in line rubbed his back. I was walking back up the line towards my house, in a daze of confusion and still half awake, when someone grabbed my sleeve. Her eyes were wide and watery, and her fingers trembled as she held on to me. "It'll happen soon." She whispered quickly, quietly. The faces of the people around her darkened, glaring at her. "You know what to do." "I know you know what to do." I sprinted back to my house, slamming the door behind me. I had 2 missed calls from Casey. I called him back and he answered on the first ring. "Dude, I was worried. I know you're always up by now." "I'm okay," I muttered, still out of breath from running back. "Casey, there are so many people now. They're all the way down the block." "Oh my god, are you serious?" "Yes, and they're so weird. I don't know what they... Hang on. Why are you up so early?" I could almost hear him shrugging through the phone. "Didn't sleep much." "Why?" There was a beat. I kept feeling like someone was in my house. I could feel myself frowning, my mouth turning down. I swallowed hard. "Casey." I know, it's stupid. Are you coming to work?" I walked down the hall to my room, still holding the phone up to my ear, just to do something, just to keep moving. "I guess so. I don't know what else to do." He sighed in relief. "Okay, great. I'll see you there." "I'll see you there." When I got back to the living room, I nearly leapt out of my skin. There was a man standing at my window, his hands pressed to the glass, peering inside. As soon as he noticed me, he sprinted away, and I watched him reclaim his spot in line, about 5 houses down from my own. The next few days kept me in a constant state of fight or flight. When I drove home from work, I started passing the line 5 minutes before I pulled into my driveway, then 6. The line only multiplied. It was like the population of an entire town had coordinated to stand right in front of my doorstep. I called the police several more times. To their credit, they did finally try and tell the line to leave, threatened them with loitering charges. Once they really did start to disperse, and the relief I felt was incomparable. But as soon as the squad car pulled away, they were back. I started to feel hopeless. On my days off, I just sat inside with the blinds drawn, obsessively checking to see if anything had changed every few minutes. I wasn't sure at this point if it would unnerve me more if it did or if it didn't. Either way, I would have no explanation. The atmosphere was changing. The buzz that had been hovering in the air since those first few people arrived was only growing stronger. They were waiting for something, and it was coming. It was getting closer. The next Wednesday, Casey called me as I lay in bed waiting for exhaustion to hit me. It was around 10 p.m., long past when I used to go to bed so I could wake up early. I had given up on routine. "John," he said when I picked up. I immediately sat up in bed. His tone was different. This was not the usual bubbly, self-assured Casey. "What's wrong?" I could have sworn I heard a whimper. "Can I come over? Can I sleep over there?" "Of course," I said right away. It was so scary to hear him like this. "Of course you can. What's going on?" "There's someone here. I know it. You have to believe me." It felt like my heart might crack one of my ribs. "I do. I believe you." "I'll be over in 10, he said, and hung up the phone. The next 10 minutes were torture. I watched out my window, this time almost completely ignoring the line. I hardly cared about the line right then. For the first time since it began, when his headlights illuminated the front of my house, I opened the front door. He pulled in behind my van. It started slowly, quietly, from somewhere mid-line. someone started cheering. Slowly, they all joined in, until the neighborhood was flooded with the sound of clapping hands. I ushered Casey inside. He wasn't himself, dragging his fingertips through his hair and licking his lips. If I didn't know him, I might have assumed he was on drugs. His phone rang and the sound made both of us jump. He shook his head, staring at it for a moment before chucking it at the floor. It shattered. "Okay," I said slowly, putting my hand carefully on his back. "Okay, let's sit down." I watched TV with him late into the night, glancing at him from the corner of my eye until I saw his shadows slump a little, and his breathing slow. At around 2 a.m., I realized he was asleep, his head half resting on my shoulder. I eased him down onto the couch, covered him in a blanket, and retreated quietly to my room, careful to shut the door softly so as to not wake him. I woke up about an hour and a half later to the sound of cheering. My headphones had fallen off at some point when I must have rolled over. It was muffled, dampened only by the walls between my room and the outside, but it was loud enough to force my eyes open. I sat up, groggily rubbing my eyes, trying to comprehend what was happening. Then I remembered Casey, out on the couch, asleep. And then I heard something from the kitchen. I got out of bed, my feet hitting the carpet, warm from the summer night. The cheering kept going, like the backtrack of a sitcom. It made my stomach twist, like someone had their hands in there, tying my intestines into knots. The pieces of Casey's shattered phone were still scattered on the kitchen floor. As my eyes adjusted to the light, I could see that wasn't the only thing different about the room. Half of my drawers were open, the contents emptied onto the counters. A chair had been tipped over, too, sitting on its back on the tile floor. I heard a rustle from the other room, and my head flew up so fast I heard my neck pop. A man stood in the living room, in the dark. He was reaching for the zipper of his black rain jacket, the hood covering his hair. We made eye contact as he zipped it up to cover his face, but not before I recognized him as the man from the store, the one who had been so upset about the phone return, the one who had threatened Casey in the parking lot afterwards, the one who had been calling him non-stop ever since. He dropped something and hit the living room rug with a thump. Then he ran, leaping out of the back window that I must have forgotten to lock the night before. My fear kept me frozen in place, completely still. I didn't even think to chase him. I looked at what he'd dropped. It was one of my kitchen knives, and it was covered in something dark and red and viscous. I looked at the couch facing away from me, where Casey's hand was draped over the arm. Limp. Casey was dead. I knew it before I even rounded the corner and looked into his slack, pale face. When the cops got there, I was kneeled in front of the couch, my face buried in his chest, my clothes soaked in his blood. It had been all I could make myself do. All I could say to him was, "Forgive me, forgive me, forgive me. Forgive me for not saving you." As they dragged me outside, needing 3 officers to even support my full weight, the cheering got louder. It echoed down the street, a ruckus and grating sound that made my head spin. I saw some of their faces under the streetlights, some beaming at me and some looking utterly heartbroken on my behalf. Like they knew. It felt like slow motion as they hauled me into the squad car, as I watched out the window as we pulled away, and the ambulances pulled up. Lights not even on. Siren replaced with that awful cheering. And down the street, down the line, someone began to rise. A figure was plucked out of the line and began to rise in the air, as if there was some invisible beam drawing them up and up and up, hovering above the rest. They had been chosen. The cheering began to die down. Some cried out in distress and protest, falling to their knees or pulling at their own hair. Some just watched. I watched in horror as my surroundings began to flicker and to change before my eyes. My house shuddered and rippled. And then it wasn't my house anymore. The neighborhood shifted and it was no longer my neighborhood. We were in the city, the street filled with cars, and my home was now a tall apartment building, spotted with window lights cutting through the darkness. In my holding cell, I was nothing. I was no one. All feeling had left my body, leaving me cold and numb. They asked me if I wanted to make a call, and I said nothing. I had no one I wanted to call. I kept thinking maybe if I had done something differently, if I had stayed on the couch with him, or taken all the warning signs more seriously, if I hadn't worn headphones to bed, if I had done something differently, he would still be here. My best friend, he would still be alive. I hardly noticed when someone started talking to me, not until they touched my arm. "You failed," they said, their wispy voice hardly penetrating my ears. Nothing changed. It was a man, maybe a cop that was out of uniform, but maybe not. He felt strange, like something I couldn't fully get a grasp on. Even while looking directly at it, I couldn't describe to you what he looked like. I nodded. It was all I could think to do. I just wanted to go back. I wanted to go back to last night, or before then even, and do it differently. If I could just try it again, I would save him. "It's okay," he said sympathetically. He took my hand through the bars. "You can try again. Do you remember me?" I shook my head. He took a Sharpie out of his jacket pocket and began to write on the back of my hand. I let him. "Go to this address," he said softly. "On this date, wait there. If you're chosen, you won't remember this. You won't remember anything. You'll be taken back to before it happened again." He spoke to me as if I were a child, his eyes looking over my face, searching for any recognition. He found none. If you interact with anyone while you're waiting, do not tell them why you're there. You cannot help them change what they need to change. They need to do it on their own. He smiled at me. He had a kind face, but something felt slightly wrong about it. Slightly sharpened like the tip of a knife. "Good luck, John." And then he was gone. I'm home now. My real home. Not the shifting, fabricated one from before my friend was murdered. I got out on bail and I've been put on house arrest for the time being. I'm still a suspect, but my lawyer is hopeful. He says if they let me out at all, they must know deep down that it wasn't me who killed Casey. I haven't washed off what that man wrote yet. I just keep staring at it. The date is in a week. My court date is a few days after that. I'm not sure if I'll try again. I'm not sure if anything would change. I think it's in my nature to be a coward. Maybe that's what he's trying to teach me. I'm just not sure if I'm ready to learn. This is a PSA for anyone trying to go on that game show. It's also a cry for help. I'm not going to say which one because if I do, I'm afraid they'll see this post and find me. I'll just say it's the one where you and 2 other people answer tough questions with a host. And, critically, if you get the answer wrong, you can go into the negative. That's what happened to me on Friday. I can still remember the sweat, slippery hand sliding on the buzzer, only halfway into the first round. "Jane Austen," I said, unsure. "Oh, sorry, Jack. Incorrect again," the chipper host said, his big smile not quite matching the moment as he adjusted his tie, and my score dropped even further. I was trying to climb myself out of a hole I was busy digging myself into. At the moment, that hole was $3,000. I'd been a fan of the show for a long time, but I'd never seen anyone drop this far. I thought the worst part would be the embarrassment of watching myself lose horribly on national television. I couldn't have been more wrong. Another heart-pounding round of questions later, negative 3,200, negative 3,800. I decided to stop buzzing in. "Not looking good, Jack," the host said, making his customary round of small talk with the contestants. Uh, yeah. I guess I'm a little nervous. The other contestants didn't even look at me. They just stared straight ahead. Maybe too embarrassed for me. They were stone-like. You should be. He slapped me on the shoulder. I flinched. I'd never seen him talk to a contestant like this before. Oh, I'm just kidding. He moved on to the next contestant, shaking the sweat off his hand that he had picked up from my jacket. I could feel my cheeks flush. It was so hot in here. 10 minutes into the next round, and I had started to regain my composure. Standing completely still and not saying anything will do that to you. Next question. What is the battle known by the Lakota as greasy grass? Silence. Nobody knew. Jack? He wasn't supposed to do that, was he? Call on someone? I wasn't sure if all the lights had turned on me, but that's what it felt like. I don't know. The audience gasped. The host smiled. His eyes started to get wide. Are you serious? You'll be kicking yourself. He was leaning over his podium. I don't want to lose any more money. I'm not guessing. Little Bighorn. It's Little Bighorn, Jack. Was that Custer's last stand? I asked, not realizing I was speaking aloud. I knew you'd know it. My score dropped another $500. Jesus Christ. When would this be over? This part? Soon enough, Jack. The host shot me air pistols. Did I say that out loud? What did he mean by this part? Final question. Place your bets. I'm sorry, Jack. You won't be joining us for this one. What a relief. I stepped away from the podium into a backstage holding area. 5 minutes later, I heard applause. I sat up, ready to get back on stage and be a good sport. Then the host appeared in the doorway of the waiting room. Hi, Jack. Hi. I said as flatly as I could. Not our best performance. No, I guess not. Hey, shouldn't I be out there? I asked, moving closer to the door. He stepped forward. Not until you pay us back. Pay you back? You were over $4,000 in the hole. What do you think? We just let our contestants go without settling up? It's only fair. I stepped backwards. The host stepped forward again. This is how it goes, Jack. The part you don't get to see on TV. I fell back onto the couch. It was soft, and I sunk into it. I wish I could have sunk further and further until I wasn't in the room anymore. The host loomed over me. Jack, his voice feigning sympathy. We can do this the easy way or the hard way. Are you crazy? This can't be happening. Oh, it can. And it is. He started to shuffle around in his pocket. Was he pulling something out? Fine, okay, I'll pay. That big, toothy grin curled back into being on his face. Can I Venmo you? The host's smile curdled. Cash. Who keeps that kind of money in their pocket? I yelled, not really asking. Then you'll have to bring it back next time. Don't forget, we do collect interest. I'll just call the police when I get home, I thought. I wouldn't do that. Are you reading my mind? I can do a lot of things, Jack. The whole room got dark. All I could see were his big eyes and his even bigger smile. All I could feel was his tie drooping onto my chest. He was so close. His breath, surprisingly cold, fogged my glasses. Fine, I will, I promise. I'll be back next week. The room brightened up again. Good, but just in case. He pulled out a wrench. My vision blurred. It's been 2 days. Typing with my left hand. How am I going to get $4,300? It was a long day at the beach, and the tide had retreated farther than any of us could remember. What had been open sea only hours ago was now a vast, jagged maze of shallow pools, black volcanic rock, and patches of wet sand that reflected the heavy afternoon sun. Tiny fish darted between the cracks, and hermit crabs scurried whenever someone lifted a stone, greedily holding on to the stolen shells they claimed as homes. Strange, brittle stars rested in the shadows with their long tentacles outstretched, though we didn't care much about them. There were simply too many. Every few minutes, someone would shout, "Come look at this," before the rest of us crowded around a strange shell or a lonely reef fish left behind by the water. Personally, I wanted to find a nautilus shell, a dead one. We all wanted some kind of treasure, really. Anything could do, nothing specific. At the very least, I figured an aquatic hermit crab couldn't possibly grow big enough to steal an empty nautilus shell away from me. Could it? Imagine getting stranded here. Noah laughed, poking a stick into a pool among the rocks. I watched a tiny fish get swallowed by the underwater sandstorm he created. It wasn't a fancy, proper fish, but some kind of frog-faced bottom dweller that moved unbelievably fast. The moment the sand settled, it stood perfectly still, blending into the background with its dull gray and white body. I'd build a civilization with the crabs. You'd lose a war to the crabs, Maya replied smoothly. They're organized. Laughter bounced across the wet rocks before being swallowed by the heavy, distant sound of the crashing waves. Noah was Maya's older brother, and I was their cousin. Farther ahead, Eli crouched beside a narrow crevice in the volcanic stone. He was our neighborhood friend, and by the looks of it, he had found something. Yo, guys. Nobody looked. We had all grown bored of Eli's exciting discoveries. He had tricked me once before, making me think I was looking at a prized chunk of whale dung, only for me to learn it was just a lousy, squishy sea cucumber. Guys, Eli shouted again. What? Maya asked. I guess she was just nice, always ready to believe whatever Eli had in store for her. He sounded entirely serious this time, though. We listened. I found something. One by one, we gathered around Eli, looming over his shoulders and tracking his gaze until we saw what he saw. At first, it looked like nothing more than a damp, tan-colored blob tucked beneath a flat shelf of rock. Then it moved. A tiny octopus unfolded itself with surprising elegance, one arm at a time, as if stretching after a long nap. I noticed a faint shimmer running across the circular grooves of its skin. No way, Maya whispered, stepping closer to Eli. It's so small, Noah added, leaning in. A baby? Eli smiled, fascinated. It's adorable. Looks like a baby one, yeah. The octopus slowly climbed onto the top of the rock, its soft body shifting in texture as it moved. It didn't seem frightened at all. Instead, it simply explored its surroundings with curious, delicate arms that curled around nearby pebbles and broken shells. I've never seen one this close, Eli said softly. Can we touch it? Noah asked. I mean, nobody answered, not because we knew any better, but because it felt a little gross to touch a squishy sea blob. Eli, however, carefully extended one finger. The octopus reached toward it. There, Noah laughed. It likes you. The little creature wrapped a single arm around Eli's finger for only a second before letting go again. Aww. It literally wants to hold hands. Maya crouched lower, her face inches from the pool. Look at its eyes. They're huge. They're kind of cute. I don't think those are eyes, I murmured, staring closer at the pulsing shapes. As the sun began setting, painting the sky in deep, bruised purples, we kept the octopus company, letting Eli play with it more. Do octopuses make good pets? Eli asked. I've seen videos of it, Noah replied. My uncle had one. No, he had a squid. Same thing. They're definitely not the same thing. As the octopus slowly crawled across the surface of the rock, The dying sunlight struck its skin from a different angle. Faint electric blue circles shimmered across its body, flashing brilliantly before fading almost immediately back into the dull brown flesh. It began nipping at Eli's finger, making him laugh, tickling nibbles. He called them. Oh, what? It changed colors. So? I don't know. All octopuses can do that, you know, Noah said confidently. All? Maya asked. Maybe we're interrupting its date, Noah joked. Everyone laughed again. Eli, however, didn't join in. I want to keep it, he stated firmly. His voice sounded tighter now, a bit more tense. 3 voices answered at once. No. Absolutely not. Why? Eli whined, though his eyes looked strangely wide. Look at it. It'll probably die if we leave it here. I think it's telling me something. It lives here, Eli, Maya said, rolling her eyes. But what if I made it a little aquarium? Noah shrugged. I mean, if you actually knew how. I could learn, Maya groaned. You watched one documentary, and now you're a marine biologist. I watched half. Exactly. Eli looked around the barren stretch of rock. We just need something to carry it in. There isn't anything out here. I'll go find a bottle or a bucket. We're literally on a beach. People leave stuff everywhere. Before anyone could even argue further, Eli stepped over a ridge of black rock and disappeared behind a cluster of deep tide pools. I wondered why he was in such a sudden rush to leave. It was as if he was feeling something shifting on the inside, a secret he didn't want to share with us. The sun is almost down, Noah called out after him. A hand appeared briefly over the rocks, giving us a quick thumbs up. Then, it vanished. The rest of us kept exploring, heading closer to the retreating shoreline. Someone found a sea star, and someone else discovered a tiny shrimp that was transparent enough to nearly disappear in the water. The minutes slipped by unnoticed. Eventually, Maya stopped and frowned, looking back toward the shadows of the dunes. Eli has been gone a while, hasn't he? Noah pulled out his phone to check the time. About 20 minutes. Seriously? He probably found real treasure. Eli, Maya yelled. Only the crashing waves answered. The 3 of us climbed over the ridge, calling his name louder each time we reached a new crest. We found no footprints in the wet sand, no discarded bucket, and no plastic bottle. There was no sign of Eli anywhere. Behind us, the tide had turned. The waves grumpily flowed back in, completely submerging the zone where we had found the octopus. Hours later, after the emergency services had already begun searching the pitch-black shoreline, Maya sat shivering, wrapped tightly in a wool towel. A park ranger stood over her, asking exactly where Eli had last been seen. She described the jagged rocks, the isolated tide pools, and finally, the little octopus. The ranger's pen stopped moving across his notepad. What kind of octopus? I don't know. Maya shuddered, shaking her head. It was tiny, brown. And it had blue circles, I added from beside her. The ranger looked at me, his expression suddenly hardening, as if my words had crushed the last of his professional hope. They glowed, Maya whispered. A heavy silence settled over the entire group. The ranger slowly closed his notebook and slipped it into his pocket. How much did he touch it? Nobody answered immediately. Then a cold dread washed over Noah as he remembered Eli smiling, watching that small, stubby arm curl around his bare finger. He remembered laughing. He remembered saying, "It likes you." Noah didn't know that those would be the last words he would ever say to his friend. Eli's body was recovered from a shallow crevice later that night. The medical examiner stated the cause of death was asphyxiation due to total paralysis. The painless, non-toxic bite of a blue-ringed octopus. Eli had been completely conscious, unable to move or breathe, as the tide slowly came back in. Let it be a warning. If you ever encounter a wild creature you don't recognize, no matter how small, no matter how beautiful, leave it alone, and make sure the people you love promise to do the same. I found myself awake way later than I should have been on a Wednesday night, but this was normal for me. I have always had really bad paranoia, ever since I was a kid. Even as an adult, it never went away. It would often come in waves. Sometimes it would hardly be there. Other times it was very much present. My paranoia would often affect my ability to sleep, and I would stay up way past when I was supposed to go to bed. And tonight was no exception. I was sitting on my bed in the dark, listening to every noise I could hear in complete silence. It was bad tonight. I went to college and scored an amazing job that paid me wonderfully, but I was so stuck up on studying and doing my work, I've never made any friends, or met any girls. It never bothered me. I liked being alone, but sometimes I wish I had someone else around so I was less afraid. I live alone in a 2-story house, and my room was on the 2nd story, so any sound would alert me and leave me unnerved. Tonight I felt terrified, and I had no idea why. It was fear of the unknown. I looked over at the time, 2 in the morning. I sighed and cautiously started to lay down, being as quiet as I could while doing so. If I made too much noise, it would suppress the sound of something in my house or someone outside. I laid my head on the pillow and managed to calm my state of mind enough to start dozing off. Still slightly paranoid. As I was just on the verge of sleep, I heard something. Crunch. I shot up, looking towards where I heard the noise. I was immediately set on alert since I was already on edge to begin with. The noise was coming from somewhere in the loft area, right next to my room. I debated for a moment until I reluctantly decided to get up and quietly tiptoe to the loft, but I didn't see anything in there. Then I heard it again. Crunch. Being right at the window, I could unmistakably determine what it was. It was leaves crunching in my backyard. I had the window open so I would be able to hear any sound outside. The loft had a window showing a clear view of my backyard. Whatever was outside was making zero attempt of being quiet, since I could hear it a story up. Was someone out there? Was it just an animal? I was too nervous to look. As I was trying to convince myself it was just a squirrel or a deer, I heard it for a 3rd time. Snap. Crunch. It was much louder this time, and I was certain it wasn't an animal anymore. I heard the snap of a stick being broken in half and undeniably the sound of footsteps. Even when I was standing far from the window, I could see a faint moving shadow in the grass. The shadow of a moving man. I slowly walked over to the window, the sounds not stopping, and saw the source of the noise. As terrified as I was, what I saw in my backyard confused me more than scared me for a brief few seconds. I saw a hooded man, dancing like a ballerina in the dark with his back facing me. He was being graceful with his steps, and with the way he was moving, he looked like he had long mastered what he was doing. He was holding a stick in his right hand, moving it with his dance, like it was a magic wand, walking while dancing all throughout my backyard, almost like a fairy. I stood there at the window just watching, completely vexed at what I was witnessing. Was this man on drugs? Was he drunk? All of these questions were rapidly overwhelming my mind, and it was starting to put me in a panicked state. When you are put in an unexpected situation, you often don't think logically, so my first thought was to shut the window. I snapped out of my trance and gripped the top of the window frame. While panicking, I accidentally slammed it shut in the process while backing away. The noise was loud, and I heard it echo into the backyard for several seconds. Even with the window shut, I was certain he had heard it. I cautiously peeked outside and saw my fears were confirmed. He was now standing completely still, paused in his dance as if time had been frozen on him. Both of his arms were up above his head and he was standing on one foot, the other foot resting on his leg, still with his back facing me. I ducked down and immediately regretted closing the window. Now I wouldn't be able to hear him moving, and he knew I was here. I quickly ran to my room to grab my phone and dialed the police. As I heard the line ringing, I walked back into the loft, crawling so he wouldn't see me through the window. 911, what is your emergency? Hello, there's a man in my backyard. Just as I was about to tell the operator what was going on, I took a look outside and suddenly stumped over my words. He was now facing me, looking up at me much closer than I would have liked. He had both of his hands in his pockets, and he was frowning like a cartoon character. Everything about him was human except for his eyes. They were just slightly too large to resemble a normal pair of eyes, and he had no pupils. We both stood completely still, just staring at each other until the voice of the operator snapped me back to reality. But I didn't look away. Hello? Sir, are you there? Did you just say there is a man in your backyard? Yes. He's standing outside looking up at me right now. I could hear the fear in my voice. What does the man look like? The operator asked. He's wearing a hoodie and he's tall. I don't know, I can't tell, it's too dark, I said. I told the operator where I lived, and with that, I was alone again. As soon as I hung up the phone, the man's frown slowly disappeared as he began dancing towards the back door. I instantly caught on what he was doing, and I ran as fast as I could over to the door, and for a moment, I was relieved. It was locked, so he couldn't get in. Or so I thought. I jumped out of my skin as I heard a loud pounding noise on the door. The door violently shook in its frame, and I ran back upstairs. I had to hide, or try to protect myself somehow. I saw a closet and bolted towards it. Before I could shut it, I saw the door being beaten down and for a moment saw the man dancing inside, an angry look on his face. It was quiet now, the only noise being the man dancing around the house. He was whispering my name, peeping around different corners. I'm 26 years old, and I've never been this terrified in my life. Nothing has even come close. The only thing I could do in that closet was hope he wouldn't find me before the cops came. I felt helpless. This man was strong enough to break down my door with his bare hands, so I had no idea what he was capable of. All I could do was hide. I heard the stairs creak, and I knew he was getting closer, his whispers becoming more and more audible as he walked. He walked straight to the closet I was hiding behind, and stopped right in front of it. He stopped whispering. He knew I was in here, his shadow barely noticeable from under the door. I held my breath and was on the verge of tears. I had no idea what this man was going to do to me. For a few moments, all was quiet, the only noise in the house being the man's breathing from the other side of the door. He was taking deep, measured breaths, and sounded like he was gasping for air. Then I heard him walk in a different direction. I was relieved for a short second until I saw the door being violently slammed down, and I watched as it fell onto the floor in front of me, but I didn't see him anywhere. I slowly stepped out and looked around frantically, but found no one. I couldn't hear him or see him anywhere, and I thought he was gone, but this thought quickly diminished when I saw a big shadow walk past my living room window downstairs. He was outside again, but how? He was just in front of me at the closet, and he broke down the door, and now he was back outside? This fact immediately made me not think this man was human, but I was afraid to accept it. In any other scenario, I would have thought considering this man to be some supernatural being would be madness, but somehow I knew. I didn't need to think twice about it. I didn't believe in stuff like this, but here I was being faced with it. I saw another shadow moving up my loft window, then one downstairs, then one at my bedroom, Suddenly, the entire house was shaking, and I could hear footsteps on every inch of the house. The sound was piercing my ears, and I covered them as hard as I could. Just as I did, I began to hear voices. Voices speaking to me in my mind. Voices of people I once knew. My late grandfather, my mother, my entire family speaking in my head, telling me I was a failure, telling me to give up. They were telling me things I didn't want to know, things nobody would ever want to know. My entire family hated me. I was the burden of the family. I would die alone. I would never find a partner or any friends. My father tried to kill me when I was a baby. My sister died when I was young, and my mother blamed me for it. All these statements were enveloping my mind. I saw visions. I saw myself in my room hung on a noose, dead. I saw my mother get into a car accident and watched the light fade from her eyes. I saw my sister being murdered by one of my childhood friends I haven't spoken to in years. I saw the hooded man dragging my body into an endlessly dark cave far into the woods, a smile on his face. I thought it wouldn't end, but eventually it did, all in a quick second. I slowly opened my eyes and saw the flashing of red and blue lights reflecting on my wall from outside. My house just as quiet as it normally was. I was on the floor, curled into a ball, crying. I explained to the police what happened, leaving out the details that would have them questioning my sanity. The man was gone, and I never saw him again. The police left and I was alone in my house again, the visions and thoughts still fresh on my mind. Whatever that man was, he didn't need to physically hurt me to leave me with permanent damage. I don't know if the things I was shown and told were true, but all I could do now is hope I can forget about it. But I doubt I'll be able to. My house was covered in footprints and handprints. I hired someone to remove them, but he couldn't. They are forever stained into my house. Sometimes I wonder if I just let him do his thing in my backyard and didn't bother him. I wonder if he would have done everything he had done. So many things still don't make sense to me, but for now I think I know enough. I don't want any of my questions to be answered anyway. Some things we don't need to know. Let me start with, I realized that maybe I should have been alarmed at accepting a job at a motel in this day and age. Motels in the first place are not the prim and proper hotel management job that I had envisioned for myself after completing my degree. Like every 25-year-old that had spent the greater part of their college experience partying and getting absolutely drunk. I had gotten a rude awakening after graduating that it was all over. The sorority girl that had aspirations of becoming a chic hotel manager in Paris fizzled quicker than a flat soda. All in all, I suppose it could have been far worse. Everything considered, I had landed a job at least. Even if the job took me out to the middle of nowhere, at least nowhere paid. To be honest, up until about a month ago, I had been surfing the internet and trying my best to become a viable applicant. It was not going stellar, but finally in the middle of the night after watching far too much reality TV and eating a bag of Twizzlers, it arrived. The email that brought me to my current place that I called home/work. Actually, I have that email saved just to show you all how odd it is. Bear with me as I copy and paste it to the post for your reading delight. Hello, Miss Wallacott. We at the motel are reaching out about a position at our establishment. It's come to our attention that you are seeking full-time employment and have a degree in hospitality. Your credentials are suitable for our needs, and we're curious if you'd be open for a phone interview. The details of the job, along with the salary, can be discussed then. We'll be waiting to hear from you. May the light be with you. Nemen, owner of the motel. And then their phone number. Please understand, I omitted the number for y'all's sake. You have to understand that it's best if you don't know the name or phone number of the motel. It'll be safer that way. At least I think it'll be safer that way. Now I had at that point been desperate for a job. Most of the ones that I had interviewed for were crap, and didn't want to pay me for my qualifications. Which, hey, I understood it was the economy. It was something or another. Well, fine. But I couldn't survive off of what they were paying, so I decided to call the man Mr. Nemon. Worst that could happen was it's a prank. Or the pay was horrible, or the job was undoable. Positives being that I got a job and could afford to pay back some loans that were knocking on past due. So I did what any college graduate who needed a job does. I called. Ring, ring. 2 rings and I heard the receiver pick up and I waited. Hello? An older man's voice sounded through the receiver. Good afternoon. I'm Wallacott. You sent me an email about a position at your motel. I said, halfway holding my breath as I waited for the punchline or answer. Because to be honest, I really didn't think that this was a serious job inquiry. More likely an elaborate prank by someone bored, or one of my sorority sisters. Of course, Miss Wallacott. The old man's voice took on a lighter tone, evidently pleased by my call. Delightful of you to call. I'm Mr. Nemon, the owner of the motel. His raspy voice was becoming less jarring and more jovial by the second. Yes, thank you again for reaching out to me first. Of course, your credentials make you a very promising candidate. Not to mention I have an eye for people. He continued. There was a slight pause on my part and his. It seemed that he had made a joke, but as far as interviewing went, it was a bit odd. Then again, based on his age. He was probably well into his later years. Different generation had far different metrics in terms of what they viewed as appropriate in the workplace. Not losing speed, he continued on. There would be a sign-on bonus, and then a very competitive salary for you. I'm getting too old to manage the motel's daily activities and guest welcoming. You wouldn't be expected to perform any of the cleaning services or laundry, but I would like you to manage the accounting, ordering of supplies, and management of staff. The position itself is a live-in. You'd be expected to stay on the motel's premise. There was a pause and I scrambled to grab my planner. Flipping to the notes section of the planner, I quickly jotted down the information. Did you happen to do some research on our establishment? A little bit, but there wasn't much information to be found. I hope that you would be able to shed some light on the specifics. The motel is a little-known spot. It's not surprising. We've been established since the late 1880s. It's been in the family since then, and we have been servicing the area since that time. It's honestly a beautiful part of the country. You'll be up in the PNW, he said, his voice radiating warmth. My hand stilled. That was one of the factors that I hadn't completely mulled over. I was located on the East Coast, and I had to head all the way to the West Coast, leaving everything and everyone that I knew. But at the same time, this was the first job that actually left me in charge of a property, rather than being in the beck and call of someone else. So after continuing the phone call with the old man, Mr. Nemon, and getting more specifics on the requirement and the salary and sign-on bonus, I found myself calling my parents and letting them know that I had gotten a job. Also telling them that I had to move and that it was on the other side of the country. They had been supportive and told me they were proud of me, and I found that I was happy about it all. Packing and moving took a lot less time than I had expected. I managed to pack everything in a week. My whole life sealed up tidily in a week of packing. Mr. Nemon had sent over a welcome package via email that had detailed out a list of specifics that I was to follow, along with rules. That was typical of any job. There were always going to be rules that they wanted you to follow, but these were on a different level of odd. These are the rules as listed to me. 1. Never follow a guest into their room. Contact housekeeping if they need help. 2. Be sure to never tell the guest your first name. They should refer to you simply by your surname. 3. Always keep the key ring on your person as you move about the motel. It's best if they are kept on silver chain and either tucked into your pocket and fastened to a belt loop. If you choose to wear a skirt or a dress for the day, they should be attached to a silver ring that can be worn as a bracelet. 4. The motel has a long history of a mascot. The current mascot for the hotel is Graham Cracker, a Great Dane. She had been trained to accompany you throughout the hotel. Please make sure that you have treats on your personage for her. These treats are provided by the motel. 5. Remember to promptly shut the doors of reception at 9 p.m. They are to be open promptly at 8 a.m., Monday through Friday. No guests should be allowed entrance after close or before opening to check into the motel. 6. Do not accept gifts from the guest. Under any circumstances. I had looked them over multiple times, both when I first gotten the email and then throughout the flights. I tried to find some reason for them. I understood the specific check-in times and stay on schedule, along with the other nuanced rule about keeping Graham Cracker happy and accompanying me. That was not a problem. I love dogs, and the fact that I was to be accompanied by one was a bonus. But still, as I read and reread them, I felt an odd sense of dissonance. However, I still found myself navigating my way to the motel, seeing as I was heading out to a relatively small town that was located deep into the woods. I had a limited choice of transportation. However, that was also clarified in my welcome package. As I stepped off the second plane, I arrived at the small local airport. I was greeted with a sign that had my name on it, being held by a rather round woman. Now please understand, I'm not judging her by any means. It's just the best way to describe my initial observation of Hilda. She was a hearty, round woman, with shock white hair and a lopsided smile that reminded me of a kid that always had a joke brewing on their tongue. Hilda wore a simple outfit that was rather homely but suited her just fine. The simple dress paired with a jacket that was rather fluffy given the weather, not to mention the muck boots that were paired with long brown wool socks. "Hello," I said softly. She looked up at me. It was then that I noted her one lazy eye that was also a foggy gray, while her other eye was a light blue. I tried not to stare, which was easy enough because she was looking me up and down. This continued for a minute or so, then she finally returned my stare, her good eye piercing as she began to smile, half her lip pulling up into a rather menacing grin at first. "Welcome, dear, to Pine Hollow. How was your flight?" "It was good. Not too much turbulence." She nodded her approval. Then she extended her hand. I looked down at it before taking it with my own. Her handshake was firm and resolute, a stark contrast to her appearance, but it felt normal enough. "You can call me Hilda. I'm a longtime friend of Mr. Nemon, and the owner of the grocery store in town," she explained easily. "Pleasure to meet you, Hilda, and thank you for coming to pick me up. I hope it wasn't too much of an inconvenience." "Don't worry about it. I had some things I had to pick up, and there aren't many people that come and go from the town. If they do, they're mainly guests of Mr. Nemon's establishment. We can't have you catching a ride with them now." She chuckled, releasing my hand as she went to pat my shoulder. Her hand had felt like ice from the handshake alone. Once it touched my shoulder, it felt like my entire arm was going numb. She didn't let it linger for too long, but it was enough that I mentally noted that I shouldn't casual let her touch me. Withdrawing her hand, she tucked the small sign that she had under her arm and led me towards the small baggage claim. The whole airport was quiet, eerily quiet. I tried to not let it bother me. However, it was hard to not notice. The flight I had been on had less than 10 people, 1 flight attendant and 2 pilots, leaving only 7 people actually flying into the airport. Each was odd, and I saw them lined up around the simple yet archaic baggage claim. Hilda's hand touched me yet again, and I nearly jumped out of my skin. Turning, I found the round woman was trying to get my attention. I'll be over there. I've got to collect my boxes and have them loaded onto the truck. You can't miss me, dear, she explained, all the while pointing towards the double doors that led out into the overcast outdoors. There was a man standing at the door dressed in some dirty overalls, along with a bright orange safety vest that was over top of a warm but worn jacket. He had a wide-set stance and was looking over at Hilda with expectant eyes. Swallowing the lump in my throat and feeling moderately abandoned by Hilda, even though I knew she wasn't my tour guide, the squat and round woman knew that I was there to work for her friend, but she knew, for some reason, that had felt important in the moment. Still ever icy, I raised a hand to pat hers before she drew it away. Okay, I'll find you once I get my bags. She gave me a lopsided grin and then made her way over to the man without another word. I had to give it to the old gal. She moved quickly, easily covering the distance. Hilda paused, said something to the man, and then they both left the baggage claim area. Now it was me all alone with the 7 other people from my flight. Taking a deep breath, I made my way over toward the baggage claim. I had already shipped some other things to the motel, but I still had brought 2 suitcases and a carriage-on and bag. There was no way that I could part with all my things, nor did I have any intention of putting them into a storage container. The idea of locking my stuff up hadn't sat well with me. I had opted only to get a storage container for the big stuff, but at the moment, I wish I had packed lighter and could remove myself from these odd people. Standing apart from the group, I surveyed them, coming up with ideas about them. The oddest was a girl that looked even more out of place than me. She was standing next to a man that was dressed head to toe in black. Black suit, paired with an even darker black bow tie. He was wearing black framed sunglasses and his hair was slicked back. His age was hard to tell, but he had to be at least a good 10 years older than the girl. She was dressed head to toe in what could only be described as a clubbing outfit. Her short black dress barely covered her butt. She was standing in pinpoint, thin red stilettos. Her bleach blonde hair styled in an updo that displayed her very surgically done face. She was smiling as she took a video of the 2 of them, the man looking as if he couldn't care less about it all, but still he was being a good sport and allowing her to take the video. Her head whipped around and we made eye contact, and I felt a sinking feeling in my stomach at the contact, but she gave me a beaming smile and a light wave before she continued to record. Exhaling, I tried to quell the unease, but I locked eyes with another passenger. It was a younger boy that was standing next to an older woman, who I assumed was his grandmother, or maybe his mother. She both appeared older, but relatively young enough to have a child of about 10 or so. The boy had an intensity to him that turned my stomach, more than the girl. He seemed small for his age, but his eyes held mine without flinching. You know that spine-tingling, pricking sensation that crawls up your skin? The last vestige of your reptilian brain that tells us we're in danger? That's what I felt as I looked into the mismatched hazel and black eyes of the boy. I broke eye contact first, as the rickety sound of the baggage claim rumbled to life, blessed by the luggage gods themselves. My bags were the first that the ancient machine spat out. Quickly moving forward, I grabbed the 2 suitcases from the luggage rack. The black bags, thankfully, looked intact, and the locks that I had secured to them untampered with. Ducking my head, I made my way towards the doors that Hilda had vanished out of, all the while feeling eyes bore into my back. The crisp air seemed to whisper across my skin as I exited. It was chilly to say the least. I had dressed warmly anticipating it, but the cold was new, and I wasn't quite sure I'd warmed to it, as I had been assured by Mr. Nemon. At the very least, the brisk air had driven away the stifling feelings of the eyes. I felt sick at the thought of being around those people for any longer. Call it a gut feeling, but something was off with them. I found Hilda quickly. It wasn't hard. She had a big truck parked outside the small airport area. The man that she had followed was still chatting with her. He had a clipboard in hand and was making some notes. Before handing it to Hilda, she took it and signed it without fuss. She looked up after she handed it back to the man, her eyes cutting towards me, as if she knew that I was standing there. She gave me another one of her lopsided grins, as the man turned his head to look in the direction that she was looking. He seemed a man of few words. He tilted his head to me, then made his way back towards the airport, but he moved towards a different entrance, one that appeared to be set aside for staff. Even if the airport was measly in size, the still had an employees-only entrance that had to count for something. I made my way to Hilda, who was already lifting the back of the truck door. Peering inside, I noticed all the boxes that had different labels. Some said produce and so on and so forth. She reached out and took one of the suitcase handles and easily lifted it up and into the bed of the truck. Then she grabbed the other. I quickly grabbed the smallest one, feeling rather bad that I had let her do all the lifting. "That everything?" she asked as I placed the small suitcase next to the other two. "Yes, thank you." "Good, then let's set off. We don't want to keep the staff waiting too long. Because it's Saturday, there wouldn't be any check-ins. But the housekeeping staff is bare bones, and it'll give you some time to settle in," she explained brightly. "Did you work at the motel?" I asked before I could stop to consider my words, my curiosity getting the better of me. She paused, but then threw a glance over her shoulder at me. "I'd say helped out rather than worked," she laughed, before continuing forward and heading towards the front of the truck. Casting a final glance back towards the airport, there was a tugging feeling in the pit of my stomach, as if something was telling me to head back, but the allure of job stability made me swallow that fear and get into the truck. The truck rumbled to life as Hilda twisted the key into the ignition. A steady rattling started as the heat began to sputter to life. It seemed like it wasn't going to, but then it gave another rattling cough, and the soft, steady waves of heat began radiating from the vents. I leaned back into the seat, finding the seatbelt and quickly buckling myself in. Hilda did the same as she locked hers into place and began to ease the truck forward as we made our way around the loop. As we drove past the airport, I noticed the few people that had been on the airplane with me were trickling outside. They all looked up as we drove past them. I found myself instinctively raising my hand to wave. There was something eerie about the way they all stood there, without blinking, watching me. Swallowing my fear, I noticed that the little boy was the only one that was waving back at me and giving me a wide smile. A pang of nerves shot through my stomach, and I quickly lowered my hand and pressed my head into the back of the headrest, refusing to keep looking at the sight. "Are you cold, dearie?" Hilda asked. Her voice drew me out of my thoughts, and I turned my eyes towards the woman. There was something nagging about her as well, but I was just glad that we were making our way to the motel, away from the people at the airport. I just needed to settle in, and I'm sure the nerves would go away. "Probably," I murmured to the woman. She nodded her head and then reached up with one of her hands and pushed the vent that was fanning her with the delicious heat towards me. The extra heat did relax me some, and I nuzzled slightly deeper into my jacket. "Thank you." "Of course, I can't have you freezing before you get to your post. It would be a shame to lose you when you've already come this far," she said jovially. Although her words were odd and I was feeling overwhelmed, I tried not to think about it. Pulling out my phone from my purse, I took it off airplane mode and sent a quick message to my mother, letting her know that I had made it safely through my second flight. The message had taken a moment to send. The message spun as if it were trying to send before it gave me the error that it was undeliverable. Looking at my bars, I noticed that I didn't have a single one. I'm only able to even write this because I'm attached to the motel's Ethernet line. Tucking the phone back into my purse, I tried to settle in for the drive, and between the steady rambling of the truck and the bone-numbing heat that seemed to seep into my lethargic muscles, I don't even remember falling asleep. But at some point I must have, because the next thing I heard was the high-pitched whine of the air brakes, startling me to alertness. Whipping up, I hastily turned my head every which way, blinking rapidly, trying to will the sleep from my eyes. Everything came back into focus slowly. The steady hum of the truck is what I registered first, as the lights from the well-lit street nearly blinded my shell-shocked eyeballs. Looking to my left, I found that I was still next to Hilda. Her face brought a profound sense of relief, as the reality of my situation came to fruition. I had chosen to leave everything that I knew, and was comfortable with, to come to this remote motel. A sigh of relief left my mouth as I swallowed down my anxiety. Hilda grinned at me, exposing her pearly white teeth. It caught me off guard how clean and pristine they were. She reached out and patted my arm. The warmth of the truck did nothing to prevent the icy shock of her touch. It felt like I had come in contact with a freezer. "Welcome to the motel," Hilda said gleefully as she twisted her key from the ignition. My eyes finally adjusted to the bewildering light took in the motel. The picture on Google hadn't done it justice. I had expected a run-show, nearly dilapidated hole in the wall. What greeted me was anything but that. The light that had nearly blinded me gave way to a massive structure that was the motel. It was long, but also tall. It sported a 2-story entrance house. Or lodge, might have been more accurate. It was wooden, but it looked sturdy. Rich undertones of umber and amber glinted in the dark between logs that made up the structure. 2 huge wooden doors that had carvings that were nearly too delicate to see from my vantage point inside of the truck. Each door had been fitted with a window that was nearly half of the doors. Within the wooden logs, I could make out neat windows that were across the front side. Stretching out from behind the main structure were long corridors that seemed to connect from the sides of the main house. Those were a mixture of other material outside of the wood. There were windows that lined the walls of the motel. Similar to the main structure, it was 3 stories high, meaning that it was a typical single-level motel. It was more akin to a nature lodge. The more I looked at it, my stomach did a little flip as I noticed from the far left a window that had a pair of burning red eyes that were staring at me. I nearly jumped in the chair, quickly averting my eyes and then looking back. Confusion colored my mind as the vivid eyes were nowhere to be seen anymore. Sucking in a deep breath, I banished away the unsettling feeling that bubbled in the pit of my stomach. "Let's get you inside." It took a little longer than I anticipated. "We've arrived a little behind schedule," Hilda said, her voice showing a hint of something. She quickly opened the door and scurried around the side of the truck. I followed suit a little slower as I stretched my neck, preparing myself for the cold wind. Mustering up courage, I threw open the door. An icy gale slapped me right across the face. A full-body shiver raked through me. Drawing my bag close, I quickly circled around the truck, just noticing that I was truly out in the middle of nowhere. The sole source of light was the motel that was glittering with lights, and stood almost as a beacon against the inky backdrop of the forest. Hilda had already gotten all 3 suitcases from the back, and was halfway to the entrance as I was just coming up to the suitcase she had left for me. Her stout form was bathed by the light. She cast a shadow longer than I thought one her size could take up. She was nearly at the door, but her shadow seemed to stretch nearly to the truck that was parked probably 30 feet from the entrance. Grabbing my bag, I quickly ambled after her. The door had a great big handle that had an ancient-looking keyhole. Without hesitation, Hilda whipped out a set of keys. The soft loop caught the light, and I could see its silver glow. Reaching out, she waved a black fob across an unnoticed pad, and the door opened automatically. I marveled for a second at the rather advanced system given its status as an older motel. Quick as a tick, Hilda crossed the threshold and I followed suit. The door began to close as I stepped through it. Then with a firm click, the door locked and I was inside. It was far more orderly than I had anticipated. The interior was clean and rather sleek. It was done in a more earthen tone, interior browns and neutrals made it pleasant. The reception desk was a little way inside from the doors. It was a rather long desk, with an older styled drawer system that looked like something you'd find at a rural post office. They were each numbered and I could see nearly 100 or more drawers. Outside of that, there was a small seating area by the row window, and then I noticed further down there was actually an elevator. Hilda cleared her throat and I turned to face her. "Sorry, dearie, it looks like you'll have to wait till morning to meet Mr. Nemen. I'll show you to your room. It's past the time for any guests to arrive," she said matter-of-factly. I'd opened my mouth to respond when I heard a knock at the door. Instinctively, I turned towards the sound. I saw two people looking at me from the window. It was the odd couple from the airport, the man and the girl. The girl was still looking at her phone. Bitterly, I wondered who her provider was. It seems like I still didn't have any service. The man was the one to knock and I stepped forward, my body moving before my mind. It was rude to leave customers waiting. That was one of the first things that had been drilled into you at school. Always help the guest. I was halfway to the door, the man's eyes looking at me expectantly, when a terrible gripping chill closed around my wrist. Stopping mid-stride, I looked down at my wrist. That was caught like a mouse in the grip of Hilda. She had moved faster than I thought was possible, her grip ironclad and immovable. "Dearie," her voice was low, oddly authoritative. "Do you remember the rules?" Raising her head, she fixed me with her one good eye. It pierced into me, and the rules that I had obsessively read over came thundering to the forefront of my mind. "To promptly shut the door after 9 p.m. No guest can check in after that," I said, reaching into my purse. I fished out my phone and there it was, in bright digital pixels. The time, 9:10 p.m. It was 10 minutes past close. Not to mention it was the weekend. There weren't supposed to be any check-ins. Biting my lip, I looked at the two that were standing outside expectantly. He was still wearing those sunglasses, but I knew. No, I could feel his stare. It seemed to bore into me as he waited. "It's only 10 minutes past. Surely we could let them in." My voice sounded onshore even to my own ears as I remember how much the importance of the rules was stressed in the welcome package. But the training from school pressed against the importance of the rules. I knew in the back of my mind that I didn't know the system yet, nor did I know the specific of the motel. Although I had read through and understood the base of the information, I had never done it before. Hilda's grip didn't relent. If anything, it got tighter, and I found the heat leaching out from my body as if someone had split open my vein and was letting the blood run out of me. "The rules." Her voice was ironclad and demanded that I listen to her and obey the rules. A loud thump made my heart sputter in my chest as I whirled to look toward the doors. He'd raised his arm and had brought his fist down on the wooden part of the door. His lip was curled up in annoyance, and he repeated, that terrible thumping pounding that made my teeth rattle. "You have to follow the rules, dearie," she hissed. Her voice was low and demanded that I obey. There was a hard edge that said plainly, "Do as I say," or maybe, "Do as the rules say." I felt torn, my stomach churning faster as I tried to breathe through my nose to steady my hands that I felt shaking. The penetrating cold bit into my wrist where she had caught it. It almost felt as if I didn't have a hand anymore. Bang, bang, bang. I couldn't pry my eyes away from her. I knew that logically it was only 10 minutes past, but I also understood that she was not going to let me. I'd have to push her away from myself, and then quickly make it to the door. But was that reasonable? I wrestled with this thought. "I don't know," I stuttered, but with a final thundering bang, I nearly jumped out of my skin. Turning, I found that the man was now nearly frothing at the mouth as he banged. The girl was now looking up from her phone. Her eyes seemed to cut straight into me, and I quickly turned away. I swear I thought I saw something. I still don't know what exactly I saw. Hilda's hand left my wrist, almost as if she knew that I had lost the will to let them in, that I had finally saw her reasoning, for some reason. I felt defeated and then happy I could turn that feeling onto the rules. It was all because of the rules. I had to follow the rules. Did I want to be a rule breaker on not even my first day at the job? Here, follow me this way, dearie. Hilda's voice was sweet. It had lost the hissing edge, and I glanced up and found her standing with a key in her hand. She also had my other suitcase. I tried to put the banging sound out of my mind. Grabbing my other suitcase, I followed Hilda down the corridor. Even as we moved away from the front door, I could still hear the banging, but I trained my eyes on the smaller woman's back. She didn't say much, and for some reason the silence was stifling. At this point, I wanted her to say anything, to maybe give an explanation to the people outside. There was no explanation, and I stopped as we neared another hallway. This one only had a singular door, and no others. She stopped at the door and it simply had "Manager" as the plate on the door. It didn't have a number, and I felt that was strange. The information packet had said that it was a live-in position, but I had assumed that I would be using one of the rooms. Not that I would have my own personal space on my own separate hallway. She used the key, and it slid into the lock with a resounding click. Leaving it at that, she didn't turn the knob or anything. Hilda had simply released the key and stepped back, leaving my suitcase where she had parked it. Well, I'll leave you to it. I'll be heading back to my own room now. I don't think I can make it back to the store. She smiled. I just stared at her, trying to think of some words to say in response, but I felt like a fish out of water. Remember, bright and early tomorrow, the head of housekeeping will be there to help you settle into your post. Remember to lock the door, dearie, she said, her voice soft and welcoming, but I felt a shudder pass down my spine at her intonation. She turned and promptly began to walk down the hallways. It was finally when she was at the end of it that I managed to get my tongue working. Good night, Hilda. Thank you for the lift here, I called, wincing as I realized I might have shouted too loud given that there were probably other guests that were sleeping. Hilda simply turned and gave me that lopsided smile before she made a left-hand turn and continued down to some unknown room. I turned towards my door and entered. The room opened up to a cute and rather updated apartment, rather than a motel room. It had a kitchen and a couple other doors that were left open. I noted that one appeared to be an office space, and the other 3 doors led to empty rooms, minus the bed in one, and the other led to a rather large bathroom. I nodded my head and quickly fished out my toiletries and brushed my teeth. I'd have to leave unpacking for another day. With that, I retired to the bedroom, and this is where I am writing this because even as I lay here, I can still hear Hilda's voice ringing in my head, repeating the same phrase over and over now. The rules, dearie, along with the steady rhythmic thump, thump, thump of the couple's fist, demanding to be let into the motel. I'm posting this because I'm wondering if anyone else is a manager of a hotel or motel that has strange rules. I'll post more as I settle in and see if the first night jitters go away. Also to update you about if they're still outside in the morning. People at work call me the ninja nurse. I didn't hate the nickname at first. There's something almost dignified about it. Ninjas are disciplined and precise. They're quick and they move without being seen. If you're going to be called something behind your back, you could do worse. But I know why they call me that, and it isn't a compliment. Not really. I wear a scarf that covers the perimeter of my head and neck completely. Over that is a face mask, the kind that leaves only the eyes exposed. And over that, a pair of large, dark sunglasses. It ensures that even my eyes aren't visible to anyone I pass in the corridor. Some of the older staff members nod approvingly. They see me as a devout woman who prioritizes modesty. The other staff, the ones who know me long enough, don't nod approvingly. They remember what I looked like 6 months ago. Full makeup to every shift, foundation, eyeliner, the works. Hair done properly, not just pulled back and hidden. Brows plucked to something I considered perfection. And I wasn't shy to show it off. I had just under 15,000 followers on Instagram. I did post pictures somewhat regularly. Nothing scandalous, though. Just a person who liked the way she looked and wasn't shy about it. A person who turned towards cameras, not away from them. In their defense, my transformation happened almost overnight, with no warning or explanation. I haven't shown my face to another human being since. My friends at work have been kind about it. They support me, or they try to. But even they get uncomfortable around my one absolute rule. I never take photographs. Not group shots in the break room, not candid snaps. Not the kind of harmless phone photo you take without really thinking. I see the camera come out and I am already moving, already raising a hand to cover what is already covered. They find it strange, and I don't blame them. I'm writing this because I need someone to understand. I can't say it out loud, not to them, not for their sake and mine. The least I can do is tell the truth somewhere, even if that somewhere is the internet. I've been a night shift ER nurse at ANA Nightingale Hospital for 7 years. ANA stands for Aldermore and Associates, a multinational corporate consultancy firm. They fund the hospital as part of their corporate social responsibility. The Nightingale part refers to Florence Nightingale, the legendary nurse herself. The administration invokes her image constantly. It is plastered on the walls, referenced in orientation, and woven into every conversation. It is written in guidelines regarding workload and duty, and what it truly means to serve. I used to find it inspiring. I understand now that it was a management technique. You don't complain about extra duties when the ghost of Florence Nightingale is watching you from a framed poster by the door. The hospital charges its patients nothing, not a single penny, regardless of treatment required. It sustains itself entirely on Aldermore's funding and external donations. As expected, it attracts the poorest and most desperate people in the city, people who have nowhere else to go and nothing to offer, apart from their suffering and their gratitude. It is genuinely a good place to work. The pay is better than any other hospital in the city. The sense of purpose is real. I believed in it for a long time. The night shift has the lowest admissions and the highest deaths. You get used to that arithmetic. You also get used to the other duties that the hospital assigns you with. Yes, there are a number of other duties that come with the job. Duties that nurses usually aren't supposed to do. One of those Florence Nightingale extras that no one agreed to, but everyone performs without question. I won't give you the full list, but I'll tell you about the one that matters. When an unclaimed patient dies, the ER nurses go through their belongings. It is done to establish identity and contact known relatives. It sounds compassionate. In theory, it actually is. In practice, it means going through the pockets of strangers who died alone at 5 in the morning. It means looking for a phone, an ID card, or a scrap of paper with a name on it. We've run out of placeholder names for those who remain unidentified. You know, John Doe and Jane Doe. We exhausted those long ago. The nurses have started using creative names instead, like the man who was found carrying a book on judo. The ER nurse named him Joe Doe. Jodo and judo. Juvenile humor. The patient died at midnight. The joke lived on for a week. I don't find it funny, but I understand it. The work gets overwhelming, so people cope however they can. 7 years has taught me not to judge the coping. It was on one of those ordinary nights that the first patient arrived. 2 young men carried him in. He was a man in his mid-40s, clearly malnourished. Bald head, long white beard, a torn jacket over a pair of dirty white trousers. His symptoms were unlike anything I had seen before. His chest had a bluish discoloration, spreading from the sternum outward. His eyes were bloodshot, but the hue was wrong. It wasn't the red, but a deep, unsettling blue, like ink dropped into water. He was foaming at the mouth. His fingers were curled inward, all of them, both hands. When I tried to gently straighten them, they refused to move. Not from rigor, not from resistance, just completely impossibly fixed. He was gasping for air with his whole chest and throat working, but producing no sound whatsoever. And every 30 seconds or so, his entire body jolted. It was neither a seizure nor a tremor, but a violent, jerking movement that lasted 2 or 3 seconds before it released. I had never seen this combination before. Not once. I followed protocol and initiated symptomatic management, and within 30 minutes, Dr. Cyrus Malla appeared. I considered myself lucky Dr. Malla is our chief physician. He operates on a schedule, morning rounds and evening rounds. That is generally where his presence in the ER begins and ends. But that night he happened to be in the vicinity, he said, and thought he would look in. He stood at the foot of the bed with his small writing pad, completely still, completely composed. He directed us with a quiet sense of authority. I had always admired that about him, the way nothing ever seemed to rattle him. The patient died in just under 2 hours. Dr. Malla graciously offered to prepare the death certificate himself, a task that normally falls to the junior doctors on duty. I observed him as he wrote down, cause of death, cardiorespiratory failure due to idiopathic cyanotic heart disease. I told him the symptoms seemed unusual. The presentation had been unlike anything in my experience. He took his time to explain it to me. Cyanosis is a lack of oxygen in the blood, which accounts for the blue discoloration. The associated symptoms are the body's response to prolonged oxygen deprivation. And poor nutrition, combining with years of inadequate hygiene, can produce presentations that look dramatic on the surface. The findings may look peculiar, he said, but they make complete sense. That is, once you know what you're looking at. He was so knowledgeable, I thought, so composed. I thanked him and went back to work. The 2 men who had brought the patient knew nothing about him. They had simply found him collapsed and done the decent thing. No ID in his belongings. No phone. I was about to close the jacket when I noticed something in the inside pocket. A crumpled Polaroid. I unfolded it. It was a photograph of me. I was in my bathroom, brushing my hair. The photograph had been taken through the window. I could see the edge of the frame, the angle of the glass. I was completely unaware of the camera. I was just standing there in my bathroom, at what looked like early morning, brushing my hair. I turned it over. Scrawled on the back in a handwriting that looked hurried and slightly uneven. Looks different in real and real. How come? Need answers. My hands were shaking before I realized they were shaking. I looked up at the corridor. Patients, colleagues, the gurney being wheeled toward the morgue. All of it completely normal. All of it completely indifferent to the fact that I was standing there holding a photograph of myself, taken through a window I had never once thought about covering. I pocketed it. I told no one. I finished my shift. I went home and sat on my bed with every light in the apartment blazing. I read those 2 lines over and over until my eyes burned. Not a threat, not even an acknowledgement that I existed as a person, one with feelings and a life and a right to privacy. Just a question, like I was a problem to be solved. That was somehow the worst part. I know what you're thinking. Why didn't I go to the police? I live in a country where policing is, to put it kindly, a joke. A joke with a long history of punching down, of harassing the very people who come forward, of making the process of reporting a crime feel more shady than committing a crime itself. And even on my best day, what evidence do I have? A crumpled Polaroid found in a dead man's pocket? A note on the back? No suspect? No name? No face. I know what else you're thinking. Install cameras, set up a security system, move apartments. I want you to understand my reality before you finish that thought. I am well paid for my position, better than any other nurse in the city. And I am not ungrateful for that. But I have a brother in college. I have a mother undergoing cancer treatment. I have a father who is quadriplegic and requires a full-time paid caregiver. All three of them are entirely dependent on me. Every penny of what I earn above basic survival goes towards keeping those three people alive and functional. So I couldn't afford a security system, and I could not afford to move. The best I could do was check every lock, every window latch, every corner of every cabinet, over and over, and try to catch a few hours of rest at the hospital, because paranoia had made sleeping at home something close to impossible. 2 nights later, there was another patient. It was a woman, appearing around 50, clearly homeless. A restaurant waiter had found her collapsed on the pavement on his way home. Same symptoms, identical in every detail. The blue chest, the blue eyes, the foam, the locked fingers, the silent gasping, the jolting. Dr. Mala appeared. He'd been in the building for another patient, he mentioned, and thought he would look in on this one too. I watched him more carefully this time. I saw him click off the stopwatch on his smartwatch when the monitors flatlined. The patient had been with us for 1 hour and 53 minutes. Same cause of death on the certificate. Same wording. He offered to prepare it himself again. I went through the woman's belongings. Tucked into the folds of her clothing was a crumpled Polaroid. This one was taken inside my apartment. I was in my kitchen, facing away from the camera. On the back, in the same bad handwriting. The nose is the first one to catch attention. The nose looks smart. That nose knows stuff. Knows. Knows. And then a bunch of ha-ha-ha's. I found the waiter who had brought her in. He was a young kid, clearly shaken, clearly there because he thought it was the right thing to do. I looked at him carefully for a long moment. He knew nothing. You could tell just by looking at him. I said nothing to anyone. The pattern repeated every 2 to 3 days. Same symptoms, same 2-hour window, same death, same certificate. Dr. Mala had appeared making excuses for his timing. I overheard him telling a junior doctor about a recent surge in cyanotic heart disease cases in the city, something he intended to research properly. He suggested that the ER nurses could serve as data collectors, possibly even co-investigators in the study. He glanced at me as he said it. His gaze used to give me confidence. Now it made my skin crawl in a way I couldn't articulate. I tried to delegate the identity checking to another nurse, but that wasn't possible. I was the senior nurse on the block. Anyone else was already past capacity. It came back to me every time. The third Polaroid showed me checking my front door. It was taken from outside, through the gap, under the door, or through the letterbox. I still don't know which. I was checking the lock for what must have been the 5th time that afternoon. On the back it said, "Have you seen how a man dies? For the sake of your pretty eyes. Yes, you do. Yes, you do. Yes, you do." The 4th one was taken from across the street while I was waiting for the hospital bus in the early evening. I was standing on the pavement in daylight, surrounded by people. My stalker was across the street holding a camera, and I had no idea. The note on that one read simply, "Lips, lips, lips." Repeated 14 times, I counted. By the time the 5th patient died, I had been living in the hospital for 2 days, sleeping in the nurse's room, eating in the cafeteria, never leaving the building. My colleagues didn't ask. They were too buried in their own work to question it. I think they assumed I was pulling extra shifts for the money. I let them think that. The 5th Polaroid was taken in the ER. I was dozing in my chair between patients, head tipped back slightly, completely unaware. The back of this one said, "That face. Want to keep seeing that face. We'll do anything for it. Anything, anything, anything. He had been standing a few feet away from me while I slept, in the building I had retreated to, because I thought it was safe. He had stood there, in the middle of a working hospital, photographed me sleeping and walked out without anyone noticing a thing. That was the one that broke me. I caught Dr. Mala as he was leaving the ER that night. I started to explain. He didn't let me finish. Such matters were outside his jurisdiction, he said. He recommended I contact the hospital's code of conduct hotline. He gave me the number and walked away. I called it from the nurse's room at 2:30 in the morning. A man answered. His voice was warm, measured, and professionally calm, the kind of voice that is specifically trained to make people feel heard. I don't remember everything I said. I know the call lasted 16 minutes because I checked afterward. I know most of it was me talking, barely coherent. I know that my tone probably wasn't professional, and I know that I was getting everything out, in whatever order it came. He didn't interrupt me. He didn't redirect me. He just listened. When I finally ran out of words, he said, "HR block, top floor. I'll be there in an hour." It was 3 in the morning. I went there anyway. The HR block was empty. Dark corridors, locked offices. The particular silence of a building that isn't meant to be occupied at this hour, except for one light at the far end of the corridor, and a voice I recognized from the phone telling me to come in. The man introduced himself as Rafiq. He wore a pale shirt with the sleeves rolled exactly twice. He looked barely 30, but he carried himself with the settled authority of someone who knows his place. His staff pass looked different than mine. It identified him as an Aldermore employee, not a hospital one. He told me to take a seat. He asked to see the Polaroids. He examined them for 5 full minutes without speaking. Then he looked up. "So the patients who carry these Polaroids, they all present similarly, you say?" "Not similarly, identically. Symptoms unlike anything I've seen in 7 years. The bluish chest, the blue eyes, and the fingers." Fingers curled inward, foaming at the mouth, gasping without sound, full body convulsions at irregular intervals. I stopped. "Yes, exactly, but how did you—" "You didn't finish your thought, young lady. Was there something else you wanted to tell me? Something else about these patients?" I steadied myself. "Well, the gender varies. We've had 3 men and 2 women so far. All of them appear to be age between 40 and 50, all of them coming from the slum, the one in the northern part of the city." The room felt very still. "Yes," I said, "but I never told you." Rafiq stood up. "You've had a long night. Get some sleep. Your problem will be taken care of. You have my word." He smiled. It was a warm, genuine smile. He then walked out of the cabin, at a pace that suggested he had somewhere more important to be. I sat there for a long time after he left. Something kept bothering me. Not that he knew the symptoms before I described them, not that he knew the demographics before I mentioned them, but the fact that he knew where the patients were coming from. I never gave him that. I just couldn't do it, even if I wanted to, because I never had that information. In fact, no one in the hospital has that information, as far as I know. Looking back, I didn't know a lot of things. The month that followed was genuinely a breath of fresh air. No more Polaroids. The patients with the strange symptoms kept arriving, but less frequently. We only had 3 in the 30 days that followed. Dr. Mala quietly ensured they were routed to a different block, one I was not responsible for. From a distance, I could still see him, standing at the bedside with his writing pad and his stopwatch, but he no longer looked at me while he did it. I started sleeping at home again. I started feeling like myself again. Or something close to it. I wish that was the end of the story. Instead, it led to the part that I can't share with people around me. It was the season of Eid. The hospital had given most of the staff an extended holiday. retaining only a skeleton crew for essential services. My roster fell on the second night. It was just me and a duty doctor, who had been yawning since the moment he arrived. My block was, for the first time in a long time, genuinely quiet. A few patients were in their beds, none in critical condition. The kind of night that feels like the hospital is exhaling. The doctor excused himself for a coffee break sometime after midnight. He soon disappeared through the double doors. I was considering a coffee break myself. The quiet was making me drowsy. That's when the ER door slammed open. Something barely resembling a human stepped inside. It was a man, or at least it used to be one. He was bare from the waist up. His jeans were covered in dried blood, brown and stiff. Not fresh. He was drooling from the corner of his mouth. His chest was indrawing sharply with every breath, the effort of it visible across the whole rib cage. He was making a sound in his throat, not a groan, not a word, but something more animal than either. His eyes were bloodshot, but the color wasn't red. It was green, a deep, flat, impossible green. His chest had a large, irregular patch of the same color, spreading from the sternum. Beneath the skin I could see the outline of vessels, dark green and prominent, tracing a path toward a pulsating area at the center of his chest. I could see the outline of his heart through the surface of his skin. It was still beating, and everything surrounding it was the wrong color. His fingers curled and uncurled randomly with every step. His limbs were twitching, like a signal firing without a target. He staggered towards me. Every step looked like the last one he would manage, looking like he was about to fall. But he never fell, and through all of it, through the drool and the growling and the green, he was trying to smile at me. "Real and real," he said. Different indeed. Wanted answers. I just wanted some answers. I screamed. I don't remember deciding to. It just came out of me, sharp and involuntary. I was already on my feet, already stepping backward. He stopped. "Is that fear?" he said. "Or is that care?" My right hand picked up a scalpel from the nearest Mayo stand. I braced myself with the only weapon I could find. He placed his hand on his chest, over the pulsating outline. "Don't worry, this one's different. Takes its time, like a body decomposing while the mind is alive." He laughed. It was sudden, genuine, and hysterical. What a joke. My back had found the corner of the room before my mind realized it. I had nowhere to go. I clenched the scalpel as tightly as I could. "The eyes," he said quietly. "The ears, the nose, the lips." Then he vomited. A pool of dark red blood hit the floor and spread. He looked down at it, chuckled, and raised his eyes to mine. Blood still running from the corner of his mouth. Green eyes fixed entirely on me. "The face." He ran at me. Not staggering, but running, frantic and lurching, twisted fingers reaching forward, green eyes wide, entirely focused on me. I pressed myself into the corner and screamed with everything I had. His body hit me with its full weight. I noticed it was less weight than I expected, and getting lighter. He slid against me and dropped down slowly, barely conscious, barely holding his eyes open. His breathing had changed. It was shallower, getting further apart. The weight made me crumble to my knees. He grabbed my elbow with his right hand, but the grip was much feebler than I expected. His body jolted for a couple of seconds. He looked up at me, at my face to be exact. Just looked for a long moment, with something in his expression, something that I cannot name and do not want to. He gasped, "Finish it, please." In one movement, I drove the scalpel into the pulsating outline of his heart. I don't know what came over me, and I don't know where it came from. His eyes closed. A single tear ran down the side of his face. He was smiling. I only remember fragments of what came after. Staff flooding the block, voices that I recognized, Dr. Mala arriving within minutes, as though he'd been waiting nearby, something putting a hand on my shoulder, the floor tilting slightly, and then as my vision began to narrow and darken at the edges, I saw Rafiq standing at the far end of the ER. Then there was nothing. The official account read something like this: a potentially schizophrenic patient, also suffering from cyanotic heart disease, arrived at the ER in a state of acute delirium. He attacked the duty nurse without provocation. The nurse defended herself. The patient died despite the hospital's best efforts. An external police investigation confirmed it. The security guard had been asleep on the job and was terminated. The duty doctor had stepped out for a coffee break and was therefore not present. The ER security cameras experienced a technical malfunction, beginning approximately 4 minutes before the patient's arrival. It was an open and shut case, which was closed in a week. I read through the clinical notes. There was no mention of green discoloration anywhere in the documentation. Description of the deceased read like a textbook. Presentation of cyanotic heart disease. Possible undiagnosed psychiatric condition, typed in bold. It also said that a small amount of blood was vomited following the stab wound. The cause of death, signed by Dr. Cyrus Mala, was precisely what you would expect it to be. A certain Mr. Rafiq had signed the document as an unbiased witness to the events. There were patients in other blocks of the ER that night, the ones resting in their beds, and the ones who had been awake, the ones who had seen the green and had rushed me after the attack. But I couldn't find a single one of them. Never again. They were poor people, possibly homeless, unregistered and untraceable. Gone with the wind, as people from that part of the city tend to be. There were 2 nurses who had been staffing the adjacent blocks that night. I was told that they resigned within the week, citing unsafe working conditions. I tried calling them several times. Their phone numbers are no longer in service. I was given 30 days of paid leave. Full salary, no questions asked. Not once in those 30 days did anyone contact me to take a statement. The hospital took care of it, I was told. That's why I cover my face, and that is why I don't take photographs. I have theories about all of it, about what was really happening in that hospital, about what the patients were dying from, about what Aldermore is actually using the building for, about what Rafiq's role in all of this truly is. I would like to discuss those theories with someone. I really do. Been carrying them alone for 6 months, and trust me, they're getting heavy. But I really have to go now. My shift starts soon, and the workload hasn't gotten better. If anything, it has been increasing steadily over the past few weeks, ever since the epidemic of cyanotic heart disease has returned to the city. But this time, the patients are no longer presenting with blue discoloration. They are presenting with pitch black, and they are no longer taking 2 hours to die. The current average is 22.5 minutes. I know the exact figure. Thanks to Dr. Mala, he still times every single one of them right in front of me. He stopped hiding it a long time ago.